So, and if you've seen our episodes, I normally ask some crazy failure questions.
Okay.
Gonna go a little bit of a different angle with you. So
Okay.
I heard this one. I was like, this is actually really interesting. I'd be curious on
Okay.
most people's thoughts. So would you rather, this is in a 1-year time frame, experience a bunch of micro failures that you grow minimally from, but you're growing? So it's like, oh, it hurt, but I grew. Or would you rather experience one catastrophic failure that altered your life?
That's a good question. Okay.
So what would you pick? What would you rather do?
I'm going to do the micro failures. I've got a whole reason for that. Have you read, oh gosh, now I'm going to it's obvious. It's the habit stacking, the atomic habits.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
The 1%, the incremental gains, the little gains. Like
Yeah.
I feel like all of life is micro failure, and it's either happening to you or happening for you, and that's your choice, you know? So.
Do you think
We're not recording yet, are we?
Oh, we are recording.
Oh, we are recording,
it's
so
safe.
I'm just going straight in.
Yeah, we're just diving into
I thought
it.
I was practicing that
No,
answer.
no.
This is the real answer.
Yeah, we don't practice.
I
We
could
just
give
lay
that a
back.
lot more polish. I could be like, here's the answer I'm going with, and here's why. But no, honestly, my whole life is a series of micro failures, and then there are, isn't all of our lives? It's like you kind of go until you bump into a wall, and then you learn and adjust, or you get sad and you give up. Right?
Yeah. Well, and that's what I'm curious on. It's like, do you think the micro failures ultimately at some point result in a epic failure, or do you think that can be avoided throughout life?
All of us are going to have epic failures and little failures. There's no way to avoid an epic mishap or failure, whether you bring it upon yourself or someone else brings it into your life, because we're human. Every human is flawed. The world is flawed. Like, there's just potholes you can't avoid. And we all have to learn through trial and error. That just is life. So I don't think it's reasonable to think that we can avoid big failures. It's a matter of, as you're learning and growing through life, like, do you develop a resilience and an appetite to embrace those big moments that you cannot avoid, that are going to come, that are life shakers? Like, I faced ovarian cancer when I was 35. That came out of left field. I have 3 little kids at home, full-time job, like all the things. Like, that's not a failure, but there are these epic things that come into your life that are big disruptors. Sometimes it's a failure. Sometimes it's just a situation. And it's a matter of kind of reframing, like, are these mistakes, failures, hardships, are they happening to me and I'm a victim of these things, and it's a setback, or are they happening for me to nudge me and propel me into new and better opportunities and new understandings of life? So it took me probably until my early 40s to start to, like, really honestly be willing to be like, these disruptions, these mistakes, these things where I trip up, where I fail, I have to, like, self-reflect, get humble, apologize, or correct. Like, that's all happening for me. That is a character development moment for me. That is a wisdom creator for me. It's not, and it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's interesting. I would say every decade, I think I would really want to experience that catastrophic failure. I think you're not growing without it. I think at some point micro failures can result in a consistency of safety that you're living inside of. But I also think if you're always hitting catastrophic failures, I would argue, are you learning the lessons then from your micro failures? And you're probably not. You're just like, it just keeps blowing up. Well, have you ever, like, just looked at the trends?
If your whole life is a series of misadventures and mishaps, the common denominator might be you.
Yeah.
It might be
it's crazy that it's a mirror. We're going to hold it up.
Exactly. So I think I too have, like, when I look back at the things that I can look at and say, oh, I totally screwed up there. And I've got several of those in my rear view mirror. But they ended up being the gift of better understanding. Like, if you can look back and you can self-reflect and you can be like, what can I learn and what can I take from that? And it can be a catalyst to move your life in a better direction than you could have ever tried to move without that failure.
Yeah. No, I love it.
Mm-hmm.
If you all haven't caught on, you're on the Do You Even Fail podcast, hence why we're just diving right into it. But before we get into just the philosophy behind failure, we have Jennifer on today. Super excited. One of the few genuine people I've run into that, whether it's business, personal, or life, your personality and what you preach matches it. So excited to hear what you have to say today. But give the audience a little bit of understanding of who you are.
Oh, thank you. That's probably the best compliment I've ever heard in like one sentence. So thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Jennifer Zick. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Authentic, and I'm glad that it comes through. I'm glad I'm representing that brand well. I founded Authentic 7 years ago. We are a national leader in the fractional CMO, Chief Marketing Officer space. And work with a lot of small businesses, helping them to what we call lovingly overcome random acts of marketing, confidently take the next right step in their healthy growth. But beyond running a business full of people I love doing work that fills our hearts, I'm also a wife and a mom of 3 young adults that are quickly launching and emerging into their own people in just really amazing ways. My husband, Ryan, and I have been married 26 years. We live in Chaska, Minnesota. We've got 3 kiddos. Our daughter, Evelyn, is a student at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, studying communications. And then we have 2 hockey-playing sons, one who's a senior, soon to graduate, so we're busy. And his name's Owen. And then we have an 8th grader, Bennett, who is just a wild middle schooler who grows by like 5 inches every day. And I wake up, I'm like, what is happening? And who is this deep-voiced man walking around my house right now? I have no more little kids. It's crazy.
Oh.
They're all big and growing and wonderful. So that's my life.
I love it. I'm just excited that you're from Chaska or live in Chaska because I live in Excelsior and I get told I live in the boonies.
Yes.
But when I mean, it's like, you're so far out in the middle of nowhere. I'm like, not really. It's
No,
a pretty
it's
cool
less
area.
and less of the boonies. Now St. Bonnie is the boonies.
Yeah,
right?
it is, right? Yeah, except for what they're building
Carver.
there.
I know. Soon
You're
even the new boonies will be the old boonies, right? We're just basically like the next outer ring suburbs now.
Oh, yeah. Because I don't know if you know, Doran built massive apartment complex in St. Bonifacius with a strip mall underneath it.
What?
And they're like, no one's going to move here yet. And they're like, yeah, we know. But they're coming. So we're going to own it. I'm like, geez.
It's happening.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
Like,
when I first moved to the Twin Cities, our first little starter home was in St. Louis Park, which, I miss that area too. That's beautiful. But I had a doctor in Chaska, and I'd have to commute out to Chaska on this Highway 7 down to 41, and there was nothing. There was nothing. I think there was a Home Depot being built at the time. Yeah, it was crazy.
I love it.
Yeah.
So before we get into your journey, I think talking about failure is always valuable, but I'd be curious in your life, do you think it's more important to look at failure as just failure, or do you think it's better to look at it as a lesson?
I definitely think it's better to look at it as a lesson. I think when it's happening and you're in the moment and you're experiencing the consequences of that failure, it hurts in a lot of different dimensions depending on what that failure is, right? It can hurt physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. It hurts. It can hurt your ego in a big way. And so then it just feels like failure. Like when you're experiencing the loss of it, it feels like failure. If you had enough failure in your life, or you've come to embrace that as part of your journey, you can kind of grab onto the faith of looking back and knowing how those failures have turned into good, to live in that moment and be like, this is actually a lesson. This is actually something that is for my good. It hurts. Can't diminish the fact that it sucks to lose, sucks to fail, But yeah, I think it's really important to think of successes and failures as our teachers. And really, I don't know whoever decided what was a success and what was a failure and the terminology we use around those. They're all just a collection of experiences, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I struggle. So many people when I sit in this room, because what do we have, like 20 some odd episodes we recorded, and they're always like, it's a lesson, it's a lesson. And I started the podcast because I think we don't look at it as failure enough. Like we don't, because if it's always a lesson means you didn't make a mistake. A lesson means you didn't do anything wrong. A lesson means it's not your fault. You're just being taught something. And that's the only area I struggle where you have to be careful because you can get a little too cynical on it right then and focus on the failure too much, which is bad as well. But yeah, I'm just in this space where I go, hey, there's so much of life and so much we can learn by allowing ourselves to admit we are flawed and we are messed up and we did do wrong, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying it's bad that you're that
Yeah.
way, right? It's like,
Yeah.
so it's good to fail and it's good that you admit you're wrong.
Yeah.
And then go, how do I learn from my mistake that I'm teaching myself? Because you're really the teacher when you fail.
You are.
So like
You
that's
are.
all my only.
Well, a failure is a failure is a failure. It's only a lesson if you have the EQ to reflect on it
Yes.
and take from it, right? Like it's not a lesson if you're not wise enough to embrace that it is, right?
Yep.
So, I think every failure is an opportunity to be a lesson, but some failures are just flat down, messed up, you screwed up, and you don't even see that you screwed up, and you're just like creating a ripple effect of that consequence.
Yeah.
And you're taking that with you.
Oh, I love that. So where are we starting today in Jennifer's journey of life? What's the first failure you want to touch on?
My first failure? Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. Well, my first failures started back when I was little, and God gave me a voice. I've been a chatty communicator, verbal girl, big loud voice, not a library voice, ever since I was little. So I was a great student who did really well in school, but I was always getting in trouble for being loud and noisy. So, I mean, my first failures in life would have been like back in the day when teachers would put you in the corner or even spank you for being disruptive in the classroom. Those were my first like documented failures on my report card, if you will. Did I learn from those failures? They didn't quiet me down, you know? Was it a failure of me?
Were you a hallway kid?
Or was it a failure of my teachers and the system?
Yes.
Yes.
So were you a hallway kid? I was a hallway kid.
You were a
Like,
hallway
go out in the
kid?
hallway. Like, stop talking. I'm like going bored out of my mind.
I don't think I ever got sent to the hallway.
all the
But I
time.
do remember distinctly being put in a corner in school.
No, which made no sense. We're like, hey, you're talking too much in class. So instead of learning, we're just going to stick you in the hallway.
That's right.
And I was like, still get an A on the test. So, I don't mind being out here. It's more entertaining. But I'm with you, right? It's like, is it a failure of the system?
Yeah. And then I had all kinds of failures along the way in terms of bad decision making and who I dated. And let me preface this because in case my mom is listening, I was a good kid. I was a good kid, but there were times I wasn't always honest with my parents about where I was, and they didn't have Life 360, right? Like, I found myself occasionally in precarious situations, which most of us will through our teenage years, you know? There was one time I got in a car with some friends with some guys we didn't know who were like driving down the highway at warp speed while drinking, and I'm sitting in the back seat thinking I might die and have no way to even apologize for this life decision, right? Like,
Yeah.
All kinds of failures. So I don't know, where do you want to start on the way? Like, what kind of failures are you looking for your podcast folks to hear?
I would say it would be great to touch on a personal growth one and then a career growth one. If you could pick one of each that we could dive into.
I feel like so much of my life between my career and my life is intertwined. So I can start with the career failure. Okay, and this goes to right before I founded Authentic. I got fired from a job for the first time in my life. And it'd be easy for me to paint a story, and I have frequently shared the story of how my job was cut based on a lot of pressures going on in the business, and that's all true. But also I was fired because I was falling apart at the seams in that job, and I definitely failed to intentionally control the situation for my own sake and the company's sake before we got to that point. So let me back into this story a little bit. So I had come out of a lot of great career experiences, but also had made some moves because of dealing with some toxic people in the workplaces and being like, all right, these are environments I don't want to stay in. And I was offered this job by a Bay Area consultancy that looked like the great job. It definitely fit my career trajectory goals for myself. It looked all bright and shiny from the outside. I got into the company, and it was very clearly culturally dysfunctional right from the get-go. They had acquired a bunch of businesses without really thoughtfully integrating them. They had brought in a new PE investor, which was putting a lot of pressure on the leadership to perform, do all of the jumping jacks that were unrealistic. And then I show up as the new head of marketing. Everybody's under a lot of pressure, but we were in a meeting one day when all of a sudden the CEO completely exploded. Like, I was sitting right next to him. The guy's a former NFL player, multiple Ironman competitive dude. Stands up, starts cussing, slams his hands down on the table, throws his chair back. It bounces back toward me, almost takes me out. I'm like, it was a ridiculous situation. And my mistake and my failure, I succeeded in a few things I'll share in that moment. But then my failure was not removing myself completely from that company and just deciding to stay in it and absorb that and stay part of that. So I called him out for his behavior at the table, and there were 12 of us at the table, and I was 3 months into the company, and nobody else said a word. I called him out. Is this how we talk to each other? This is not what I signed up for. This is not how, we should be behaving. Nobody else said a thing. And right then and there, I knew I had a target on my back. And then I started becoming more and more insecure in my role there because I knew that I had, made myself a target. And rather than just leaving that position, I started becoming really emotionally like unstable. Like that was almost like a PTSD moment for me in that moment. And I was kind of like navigating Survivor after, and then I started like showing up not great. Like, and the day before I got fired, it was our big sales kickoff. It was several months later because I ended up being with that company for about a year and a half. And we were at the sales kickoff, and I had too much to drink. Like I was angry. I was not in my best mode, right? And I ended up in like this tearful conversation with one of my coworkers in like the company reception. I'm like an executive leader in the business, and I'm like not on my best behavior that night, right? So I knew that they were looking for reasons to let me go in the first place. And so that was kind of the tipping point. Like I totally failed. I like let myself be eroded to the point of being emotionally unstable in a situation where I should have just stepped out much sooner. So losing that job was the best thing that could have happened to me because I should have left on my own and I didn't. And then I lost the job and it was humiliating to me and it was very humbling for me because I've always been such a high performer who shows up strong, and I was not showing up strong. But it was also a reflective moment that really catalyzed for me. Like I had some great career experiences, and then I had just enough really painful ones to be like, I need to do my career differently from this point forward. And I need to place a bet on myself. I'm going to start this business I believe I can start. And if I'm honest about it, my motivation to start Authentic in the early days 7 years ago was kind of fueled 80% by anger and 20% by like my belief in what I was building. And then I had to spend a lot of time like working on myself, reflecting on what had brought me to that moment and that loss and that failure in my career, which is the biggest failure I've ever experienced and the most like public to my team and the company, right? And then I had to forgive myself because we all screw up, and I had to forgive the people in that company that did the harm and also didn't have my back during those really difficult moments. So did a lot of work on forgiveness and on like what's the lessons I can take from this, and how do I show up as a wiser leader, and how do I build a company and a culture that would never ever ever look like that, right? So that was probably my biggest professional failure.
What's interesting is you talk about it, it seems like, so you saw this job, it looked really shiny, it looked really cool, then you took it, then you saw something bad about it, then you stayed in it. So what was the blinder that kept you from facing reality throughout that journey?
I loved my team that I was building. So I had come in and done a lot of really hard work to clean up a lot of stuff that had been left unattended, and there were some people that should have been let go a long time before I got there, and I had to be the heavy hand. I had to rebuild that whole marketing organization, and I loved the team I was building. And so I got blinded to this idea like, okay, there's a lot of dysfunction over here at the leadership layer, and there was even more stories I won't go into, but there was a lot of dysfunction there. But I thought I can suck it up. I want to have a real impact here. I can make a difference. I can just kind of put that aside and then focus on building a really high-performing team. Like, I can prove that I'm made to do this. And I did an awesome job. I built an awesome team. They were a high-caliber team. But I wasn't dealing with my own stuff in the middle, right? I didn't address how that had impacted me and what it was turning me into in that situation.
Yeah. It just sounds like when I hear it, I picture myself easily getting in that situation going, hey, like when I look for jobs, it's great for my career. So I'm going to kind of be blind to everything else, and it's going to give me the next stepping stone. And then second, when I hear you're in it, it's so easy to look around and go, look what I'm doing though. And then I go, okay, well, that's a pride thing, right? Like I'm so wrapped up and look how good I am that I'm doing this. And it's like,
or I'll show you.
Yeah, like, I'll show you how great I am.
Me out the door. I was like, okay, now you let me go. Now I'll really show you. Just watch me shine.
Yeah.
But then I had to like humble myself because it was valid. Like I was falling apart. Now, I could either become the person that stays grounded in bitterness and blame them for how it affected me, or I can become the better person who says, boy, I ultimately behaved badly, and that is completely on me. I have to own that. And if I could rewind the tape, how would I have addressed it differently? But holding on to that unforgiveness or that bitterness isn't serving me well at all. Like I need to forgive myself for, not seeing, not addressing, and I need to let go of anything I harbor against anybody else.
So I'd love for you to walk through that part of it some, because your story reminds me a lot of an old company I worked at. One of my mentors, Don Zimmerman, she came in as the CMO, almost identical. I'll just say what it was. It was a very man's world and very old school, abrupt way we ran, and she spoke up against it. Yeah. Clearly became a target on her back, but instantly became one of my mentors because I was a sub-layer of that where I was getting used as, hey, you're the young guy, just do it, right? Just do all of it. And when she first showed up, one of her first weeks there, she heard about me, heard these rumors about this guy who just does all this crazy stuff. And she's like, hey, let's go for lunch. We sat outside. And her first question to me, she's like, how are you? I was like, oh, I'm good. She goes, Devin, I'm not your typical C-suite. Like, how are you as a human, though? I was like, oh, I'm fine. But she never would give up every few weeks, just, hey. And she ended up target painted. Her and her whole team got removed from the company, and then followed all these tumbling blocks followed, right? And I left though super mad and bitter. And it took me a lot longer to realize all my mistakes that I also caused inside of that environment. But she moved on to healing so fast. And I think it'd be helpful for people to hear, well, how do you do that? And go, it's my fault, but they also messed up, but we can move on from it.
Well, a big part of sharing my story, I can't share my story without acknowledging that I'm a person of faith, And so for me, so much of like the context of who I am and who I want to continue to become is rooted and guided by that. So I left very hurt, but I sought, wisdom in prayer and scripture and in talking with people I know, love, and trust, and reflecting. And I can't say that it was a super quick healing process for me. It kind of felt good to hang on to that anger, like that fire, like was a motivator for me. It was a motivator, but and it's still humbling to talk about it and be like, I kind of broke down. I kind of had a public display of crazy in front of a bunch of people that I wanted to be put together in front of, but that's what happened. And so I think it's just by, every single day I wake up and just pray for wisdom. I'm like, please help me learn something today and become a wiser person, right? Like help me and help the words that I say and the actions that I take be of benefit to others. Like help me, shine a light in this world. But I'm not perfect at it because I'm a broken down human, right? So I don't know. It was a process. I felt like I got not only lost the job, but like kicked on the way out when some of the senior leaders who were either silent at the table or were the, truly kind of abusive leaders, like on LinkedIn with me, unconnected with me. It's like I had tried
high school.
I had tried to take the high road and had sent everybody thank you for the experience. Like I'm going to take the high road out, and then just felt like that's a extra low blow on top of this. But I just had to acknowledge this is how I feel, and I'm angry, and it's okay to be angry, and also then start to pull apart the fact that I'm angry about the situation, I'm angry at other people, and I'm angry at myself, and kind of really address each of those separately, right? And then eventually start to really be thankful for the good things that came out of that experience. So if I hadn't melted down and gotten fired, I don't know that I would have ever been brave enough to start Authentic or had the fire in my belly to do it, prove that I could. So in that way, it was an awesome catalyst. It also put me into a position where I was no longer beholden to anybody. Like, if I'm going to do this, I'm my own boss now. I get to set a different kind of table. I get to build a different kind of team. I get to nurture a kind of culture. That's the kind of environment I would, my whole career, have wanted to be part of. So, yeah.
I'd be curious. So you're probably fourth guest we've had on that has touched on what happens after your failure around abandonment, basically. Yeah. Like how the world just kind of is like, you don't exist, boop, and they just kind of float right away from you and don't want to associate with you. And so I'd be curious, in your space, when that happens, what's the biggest lesson you took from that? I mean, how do you see the glass half full in that moment?
I think for me, it was, it took a little while to recognize it, but you're never as alone as you think you are. You're never as abandoned or as canceled as you think you are. But you very quickly find out who really are your people. Like, I think a lot of us believe that our coworkers are our people. until we are no longer working with them and suddenly they're no longer there. Like my husband is a corporate guy, always has been, and has worked in big corporate environments and therefore has suffered multiple layoffs. And every time it's a surprise to him how like, where did all my people go? And you know, who's available to help me network into my next opportunity. And so, but then you also in those moments of feeling like suddenly you got dropped, you find the people who catch you and you're reminded of who your true, real friends are, the people who really love you through thick and thin. So that was truly the case for me. And then when I started Authentic, I've always lived in the Twin Cities. I've always lived in Minnesota, and I spent a big part of my career building a company here, being part of a company that was building here. And then I spent a few years in national and global roles. And so I was working remotely and I was gone a lot. And I was worried that when I started Authentic, nobody would remember who I was because I was like a has-been here.
Yeah.
So it was incredibly humbling and so delightful that when I finally hung my shingle and kind of told the world on LinkedIn that here I am and I'm starting this thing, so many people from my past life and true deeper connections in the business world and my community were like, love it. We're here for it. You know, let's help you get started. We believe in you. So that was just awesome. So I guess what I would say to the people who are in the moment of like post-failure personally or professionally where people have kind of like washed their hands of you because that's a mess, let it go. You don't need a whole bunch of people who are your champions. You need a couple really solids.
Yeah, I would say it's really important how you talk about you need a few solids, and I think we need to stop mislabeling levels of friendships inside a business. Like it's great to be really close and understanding that you're friends because of where you work.
Exactly.
So I'd be curious in starting your own business, having employees, like you can't be that close, intimate person for everyone. It's just not possible. And your company, sorry, it's going to happen when someone leaves, they're going to feel abandoned even if they're not because you're no longer part of the team. What do you do though to help with that culture in the meantime?
Yeah. Well, for the first several years we were building, one purposeful change that we made even to our vocabulary at work is that we stopped referring to Authentic as a family because it's not a family. And so one of our CMOs so lovingly pointed that out that like that word was going to be not good. And we're like, you're right. You're exactly right. Because we've all been on the receiving end of what happens when changes unexpectedly happen in a workplace, right? So we've been very clear about, you know, this is a team. But I'm also really clear about what love means. Like, I'm not in business just to sell services to grow other companies. I enjoy the work that we do, but I truly love people. I truly love people, and I want my business to be a platform to love people well. And what I mean by that is, like, I want them to know that they're valued, that they are cared about, that they are seen, heard, respected, that, like, they're treated well because they are valuable. Just as being human, they're valuable and they're loved. And as part of our culture, I can truly say that I love my team, even the people I don't know very well because I don't work with them day to day as often. I really, truly care about their best, you know, about the best in their life. I care about them. But sometimes you can really care and love somebody and truly want the best for them, and they're not the right fit for your team and they're not a performer and you've got to cut them loose. I've had to do that several times with people I love. And then sometimes because of the circumstances of it, I've had to not be in contact with them if there were, you know, things that kind of happened along the way, but it's not because I don't care about them. So it's absolutely true. The older I get, the more I'm comfortable with the fact that I have very few like close friends. And if you've been through enough failures in your life or your career, you realize that not everybody that you think is a friend can be trusted with the heavy stuff. Not everybody can enter your mess and like be trusted with that and love you through it unconditionally. Very few.
I think too often we invite people into what's a small mess, and we invite so many, it just becomes greater because of the voices we invited into the room.
Yes.
And it's like, hey, if you just kept it in your smaller circle, probably be a lot less messy, probably be a lot less confusing, and have a lot less to process.
Totally. Totally. So there are layers. There are totally layers about the people around us from the, you know, core family outward in terms of those relationships and that level of friendship and closeness. And, you know, so yeah, if there's one lesson I learned as I started to build Authentic is like, okay, I love these people. I do. I love this company. I care about our clients. I care about our partners. And I want there to be honorable relationships across the board. Like I want us to one of our core authentic actions that articulates our core values is care deeply. That was our authentic action of last week. Like, we want to care deeply, but that doesn't mean that we just accept anything.
Yeah. Okay, so a question I have for you, you touched on your faith, and I'm definitely a person of faith. Is the only reason I can get through a day. Life's too rough. But I think something you touched on, but as I started thinking about before you said it, was you're like, hey, but I'm not perfect, right? I mess up. And I think faith and perfection are commonly associated with each other inside the business space. And so when you don't act a specific way that people picture faith-filled people should, then you get a different image put upon you. And I would be curious if there is either a story where you experienced where your faith hindered your career or where you failed your faith in your career.
I would say, so I can say this honestly, I'm so grateful to God for protecting me from myself in a lot of circumstances where I might not have had the wisdom to use the best judgment, right? Like, there are so many moments. I mean, just this morning, I was playing on my phone Psalms and Proverbs while I was getting ready in the morning, just trying to kind of simmer in that. And one of the scriptures that popped out was about, how a wise person guards their tongue, and like, you don't hear filthy talk coming out of their mouths. And I am so human and so flawed. And like, I have said words I'm not proud of. I have one of the other scriptures had to do with like, don't slander people. Don't hurt other people's reputations. I'm like, yeah, I might have thrown a couple people under a bus at one point or another because it seemed like that's the right way to maneuver to advance your career. It's like, it never feels good or feels right to be disassociating from your core belief system with your behavior. But like, when you believe, as I do, that like we're a two-faced person, like we are human and prone to sin and selfishness and mistake making and tripping up, and we have a spirit that's eternal that wants to do what's right. It's like they're at war with each other. I'm at war with myself every single day about the person I aspire to be. And as a Christian, I follow Jesus. So I look to Jesus as the model of like, that's perfection, right? That's what I'm aspiring to be. Somebody who showed up as like tangible love in the world and also like didn't comply, didn't fit in. So that's answering the question of like, has my faith ever been a hindrance to my career? I would say no. I have let myself down many, many times in regards to like, I'm not Jesus. I'm not junior Jesus. I'm just Jen, that's all I am. Just a messed up person figuring it out as I go. And by the grace of God, I think I've been rescued from a lot of potential disasters along the way that I could have put myself in precarious situations for sure. But one of the things that I've been reflecting on since I started my business, I've been a lot more, I'm a Christian person who runs a secular business, right? Our business employs and serves people of all different lives, and it's not a requirement that we work just with Christians. So I love being around people, diverse people, and people from all backgrounds. I think we have so much that we can learn and share together. There were times when I might have been more intimidated about sharing my faith as a part of who I am because I didn't want to offend anybody. But what I've come to learn as I've just been more authentic, truly, in being who I am. I don't expect anybody else to be who I am. I'm just being me, and I'm just sharing with you who I am. People respect that way more than you think that they would. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions right now is that our world is totally divisive and everybody's out to cancel everybody. I don't experience that at all. In fact, the more that I show up in these public forums and acknowledge, like, I'm a person of faith, and that is like table stakes who I am first and foremost. And then above and beyond that, I love my family and I have been blessed with a great career, right? So the more that I show up and I'm just speaking my truth, the more people are like, hey, I feel like I know you. I feel like I can trust you. You're genuine. I haven't seen a lot of the hate that people talk about being thrown around. I just don't see it.
Yeah, I would say the hate doesn't exist, but I would say unless a leader like you steps up and shares something, whether you're Muslim, Christian, whatever it is, then I think everyone walks around with a filter. Because that was my biggest mistake last year when I went off onto my journey. All the things I was doing was everyone I ran into was this filter. You could just tell them like, oh, great to meet Jennifer's Instagram. Not you. She actually wasn't fake. But a bunch of people were like, oh, okay, this is your Instagram version of you or whatever you want to label it as. And what was crazy for me was with the faith, it was all of a sudden 6 months, you look back and you're like, well, who am I? Like, I just followed the path that the world says to follow, that all the voices I listened to around me, who I should have been going to faith-filled people who had gone before me, not worldly-filled people who had gone before me. Then you end up in this space, you're like, I don't even recognize who I am anymore.
Well, it's easy to feel pressure when you're listening to all the voices of culture and perspective. It's easy to feel the pressure to water down to the most, like, universal possibility of existence so that you fit everybody's potential mold, right? That is like the least authentic version of who we can be as humans. Like, the most beautiful thing that can happen in humanity is when we are unapologetically, boldly ourselves through and through in every dimension of our lives. And it shouldn't take like extreme bravery to be that, but it does, because there is pressure around us to conform and to not be individualized, right? To like just go with the flow of whatever the popular opinion is, right? So, and that does not make us a better human race. Like, there is beauty in opposing ideas and challenging one another's thinking and elevated conversation about spiritual and philosophical, and like to be able to respectfully have dialogues with people that feel differently, live differently, believe differently is beautiful.
That's entertaining about pillars. I'm like,
Yeah.
it's so boring to like just sit in a room like, well, we're group thinking again. This was fun.
Right.
Like, glad we all agree.
Right.
Next, like,
Right.
life's over now. Cool.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And I can't say that I don't approach life with some filter. I have to use a filter, right? I mean, I don't want to be an idiot, but like, I also am trying to be really conscious that as I share my authentic self with the world and on business forums like LinkedIn, or my personal forums like my Facebook or my Instagram, that like I do it in a way that is reflective of the most positive version that I want to project in a way that honors my value system, right? I don't want to be out there. There are plenty of times, like if you showed up and just dropped in as a listener in my house, you'd hear me complaining about something. But like, I don't want to be the person who takes that to social media. You know what I mean? Like, we all have plenty of things to grumble about. We all have plenty of things that are hard. And it's not saying you can't show up with some of the hard things in your life. Definitely, it shouldn't all be rose-colored, because that's not life. But like, there's a difference between acknowledging hard with some positivity around it and just being the person who's just drudgery to be around, right?
yeah, absolutely. So you've touched on the transition into what is authentic brand now, and the failure that led to that. Obviously, the good old fun failures we all lived in, high school and into college. Is there any other major failure, whether it was in a sport, a friendship, a career, that really shaped who you are, or even a lesson that you want to touch on?
Yeah, well, I would say, first of all, I am incredibly blessed and fortunate that I've had the opportunities I've had in my life, and I've had the support I've had in my life. Like, there aren't any moments where, like, man, the bottom just dropped out, right? Like, I'm really grateful. I got to be the first in my family to graduate from college. I chose a great life partner, and we married. I was 20 years old by a month when we got married. And thank God that wasn't a failure. I mean, it could have been so many times. Anybody who's married and is still married, like, that's a choice. And that is a work effort, right? So like, there are so many things that could have been failures. Like, there was a critical moment early in our marriage where, when we were dating in college and engaged and so young, and we didn't know what we were growing up to be, right? I thought I was gonna get my college degree and secure my husband. That was what I was there for, and then work for a few years, and then have babies and stay home and raise them full time, which is a noble life. I love that, and it's what I thought I wanted until I got into my first job that was like a career trajectory, and I was very good at it, and I was very driven. I very quickly became a near workaholic. That was one near failure. Like, I was gone all the time, and my husband was always alone, and I was really getting like, my ego was getting really pumped by my accomplishments, and we were getting further apart. And literally, we had to sit down like 3 years into our shiny new marriage and say, hey, I'm not the person that you thought you married. Like, I'm not going to be that full-time stay-at-home mom probably. And like, should we just cut our losses right now while we just own a tiny house and a cat and a dog, and we don't, we can make a pretty clean split. And that could have been the moment where like I could have looked back and said, well, that was a failure. But I'm so grateful that like we both just said, hey, it's going to look different than we thought, but like we can just reshape this partnership. Like, let's not give up on it. And so we both committed, and that commitment has been 26 years of like kind of regularly going into counseling and other like reinforcements, because we're constantly like, if you're not working on it, you're constantly on the verge of failure. I mean, marriage is I'm so grateful for the blessing that it is, but it's like, it's a partnership that requires work and investment. So
Yeah.
there's that. And then I'm like, this isn't a reflection of my personal life story, but my dad is an addict. And so I have learned a lot by being really close to that experience and what it looks like to face the demons and the struggle and fail and fail. Like, I've watched my dad fail and fail and fail to the point of losing everything and everyone, and like a really bright, high, like great life to, you know, a life apart from almost everything and everyone, and having to kind of try to pick up the pieces now. And it's like, that was it's been such an informative part of who I am and what I learned as a child of addiction. So that's a way to say, like, there's so many things that could have been really big potholes in my life that truly only by the grace of God, not because I deserve a good life, I've managed to avoid those things, but they always feel like, you know, I have a very healthy respect for my relationship with alcohol as an example, because I'm like, if I went too far with that, like I could drop off a ledge, right? I see how that can happen.
Yeah, I think you touch on a lot of stuff that comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is your emotional, you know, your EQ of how aware are you of what's your weaknesses, what's your strengths. But something I have to touch on that's fascinating. So you were how old when you got married?
20.
20, and you said how many months passed though?
I got married in August, and then my birthday was in July, so I just turned 20.
And how old was your husband?
22.
Okay, so my wife was 20, I was 22 when we got married.
Really?
Yeah.
Go,
I was
youngsters.
like, yes. But yeah, it's so important when you touched on out of vulnerability. We looked in January, looked at each other because she works full time, started a business. I work full time, started multiple businesses, and we looked up in January. We're like, hey, like, I don't really know who are you? Who am I? Like, what? And it was so weird because people were like, oh, so you're not in love? I was like, no, we went like this for 12 months, just head down. And all of a sudden you picked up your head and you're like, this is weird. Like, I don't want to not be here, but I also don't understand really why we're here, what we're doing. And so 4 months of really hard work and choosing, like, no, we both were like, well, didn't realize in the back of our heads, like, oh, this could be over and we don't want that.
Right.
And so like, well, we need to fix that. And so like we're on the other side. But again, to me, it's like, I, again, don't feel like I deserve it. Oh, my God, I don't know why you keep protecting me from just blowing up my life, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, seriously. Well, and just, you know, how many years now have you been married?
We'll be 9 years in July.
9 years. That's amazing. Congratulations. But, like, our life has been a series of kind of, like, moments where we've lifted up our heads and gone, man, we've started drifting apart, and we're on different tracks, and now we have got to intentionally bring that back together. And then you throw 3 kids into the mix and full-time jobs, and there's so much pulling on you and so many things and people that need you. It's hard, but it's worth it. And the sacrifice that comes out of, like, yeah, I'm gonna give whatever this partnership needs. And like in our careers, there were so many times when we could have imploded because, like, early on we didn't understand, like, we fought over the stupidest things, like the me time factor. Like, well, you already went hunting with the guys for 2 weekends. I haven't had any my time. And like, we were like keeping score of who had how much time, you know, it was like so silly. But like, and then later in our careers, it's like, well, which one of us is going to have our foot on the gas right now? Because if I turn down this opportunity, that really slows me down. But if you're moving in this direction, somebody's got to be here to take the kids to and from. You know what I mean?
Something's got to give. Yeah.
Yes, there's this constant, like, how do we negotiate? And there's no such thing as like a 50-50 marriage. It's never 50-50. You go through seasons where it's like 20-80 and 30-70, and like you're constantly having to kind of maneuver. And the blessing is in figuring out the fact that, like, the marriage is 100%. However you get it done, as long as you're figuring it out together, right? Like, it's hard.
I think it's interesting your base touch on sacrifice, right? Like, I think any good thing involves sacrifice, whether that's a kid, a marriage, or even starting your own business or a good career. Like, at some point, we've all taken moves where you take a step back and make less money because it's a good opportunity to get your foot in the door. So now you're sacrificing, but they're sacrificing hiring you because you're less experienced, whatever. So I'm like, But I think we live in an era right now where we all want it to be equal and fair every time. It's like,
Right.
no,
It's
like
not.
you're never going to get to where you want to go with that mentality. It's
No,
just not
absolutely
possible.
not. And we are all indoctrinated with this idea that our careers have to always be like an upward and to the right trajectory of advancing compensation, titles, seniority, responsibility. But like in the group I just spoke with before I came here today, we were talking about the fact that like most of our careers in reality will end up looking like a step forward, a step to the side, a step back, 2 steps forward, a step to, like it's not upward and to the right. And we should not feel like we're failing. It shouldn't feel like a step back is a demotion if you're doing it with the intention of honoring the most important priorities in your life and the most important relationships. And that's what I like. It took me through my 30s into my 40s to really embrace this reality that like, there's definitely no such thing as work-life balance. Things are never level and fair and equilibrium. There's an integration, and it has to come from a place of deep-rooted prioritization and knowing where your anchor points are. Because if you really know where you're anchored in terms of your values, and you guide your decisions from that point forward, then it doesn't matter whether the world would look in and say, that looks like success. It will feel like and be success in your own life because you'll be honoring your true value system, right? And that is what success is to me now. It's not about, there was a time when success looked like the next title, the promotion, the accolades, the awards. And ironically, now that I've gotten to a point in my life where those things are happening consistently, it's a blessing, that no longer is what means success to me. What success means now is like a life lived without regret. And that doesn't mean I haven't failed and screwed up and been a complete doofus. I definitely have. But like, I don't have regrets about it because I'm able to take those moments of failure and say those were not just happening to me and I didn't just make them happen to me, even though sometimes it is me. They're happening for me. This is happening for me. So
Yeah, I think talking about values, it's really important to inventory those. And I think it's not something you do one time. I just re-inventoried my values today, actually, at my counselor. And I was like, those are so much drastically different than a year ago. And I would question for you, for the audience, like any tips on someone's at home, they're going, hey, she's talking about values. How do I know I'm not just filled with all these TikTok values versus what mine are? Any tips on identifying who they are and their value, actually?
You got to get quiet time away from outside influences and go deep inside. And if you are a person of faith, into that prayer and searching your own soul and searching for the wisdom, that wisdom. For me, the way that I recenter is that every quarter I take myself all by myself, maybe my dog, but either just by myself or me and my dog, up to our lake home for 3 to 4 quiet days where I don't take business meetings. And I will divide that time between kind of working on strategic thinking about my business, like reflecting on like, do I feel good about the kind of leader I am in my business right now? Do I feel good about the trajectory of my business and the pace of things? Do I feel like that's honoring what I want that to represent in my life? And then I ask myself questions about myself, like what am I learning? How am I growing? What do I need to maybe change? Like logistically in my life with my schedule every single year, multiple times a year, I kind of come back to like unclutter my schedule to create the space to honor the things that are important to me. Because life will throw a bunch of stuff at you that will take your time. And if you're like me, you have the best intentions to say no to the distractions, and then eventually you start saying yes again, and they suddenly are cluttering up your time and your calendar and your energy, and your family's getting the scraps, and you're not getting to the gym, and you're not you're not doing the things that are actually good for you anymore. So I have to get away. I have to honor, like carve out space for reflective time where I'm not asking the world to inform what I should feel or think or be. I'm just asking myself and asking God, like, where am I? Where am I going? Who am I becoming? What am I learning?
Yeah, no, I love that. It's who do I want to be? And a lot of people probably listening to this are hustlers, runners, yesers, not knowers, right? And all of a sudden you wake up one day, you're like, I'm doing 1,200 things and none of them are productive.
Yes.
How do I recenter on that? So I'd be curious we've talked about some personal growth, faith, the lessons you've learned from your old job and transition to your new one. Just did a quick dive on how do you actually identify your values. For the audience listening, what is like the nugget you would give them? Like, hey, you listened to Jennifer today. the challenge I have for you, either something you can think about or something you can do over the next week, what would you leave them with?
I'm not wise enough yet to summarize in one statement something that's going to change the lives of your listeners. But I mean, the one challenge that I would give them is like, put on your calendar the next time you're going to have some quiet time. Just put it on your calendar now. And it can look like an hour of like not taking any meetings, not being on your screen. It could look like getting away for 4 days. It could look like I took a whole month-long sabbatical, but it wasn't quiet time just to myself, but it was away from work. And I literally did not check an email, and I was blessed with the fact that I had a team to run the company for a month. But like, take a step now today to put some time on your calendar where you're just going to sit with yourself for a while, do some reflection, and decide right then, like, what is the next thing you need to maybe adjust in your life, in your commitments, so that you can honor your deepest values.
Yeah, I think that's really important because we spend so much time thinking doing will create the next opportunity when the only time you'll ever find it is in a moment of silence. I mean, busyness has killed success in our lives, and we've become, everyone's like, look what I do. I'm like, yep, so does a robot. But like, you got to think further, right? It's like, no, stop. The only way that you become something greater than what you are is processing your life, not doing your life.
That's so true.
So I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's literally almost been an hour of great conversation. So that's incredible.
It's so funny that like the first 10 minutes I didn't even know we were recording. I just thought Devin was here like, hey, let's tee this up. Let's get
Well, don't worry, we'll cut that part. So she's safe.
It's okay. It's okay. But, I'm happy to share.
Yeah. So no, it's always warm up and then we dive into it.
I love it.
Cool.
Good.
Well, I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Took quite a fall, didn't we, Master Bruce?
And why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up.